Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. That's the first line of a poem by Allen Ginsberg, written, I think, in 1953. And it used to be my favorite poem. And only a few days ago, I got back from Lebanon. And while I was there, I thought about that line a lot. Because truly, in the last few years, people in Lebanon, my people, have really experienced a lot. And a lot of maddening shit. And they're still experiencing it. These things aren't events, they're structures. They're situations that have no clear end. And it's taking a toll on people. It's taking a toll on me. And while I was there, I was thinking a lot about this project, that I started 2 years ago, Politically Depressed. And it kind of reinforced my initial thinking coming into it. Because genuinely, I see all these people that I've known for years, at this point, decades, 2 decades at most, but still, it's a lot of time. And I've seen the city changed, I've seen the people change. And so, I don't know. I want to talk a lot about it. I want to share some updates about my trip because although it sounds a bit dramatic and intense, and in many ways it was also really good. I had a really, really good time. Like, for the most part, I saw a lot of people that I loved that I haven't seen in a while. Ate a lot of good food, but always with the awareness that, just like a 4 or 5 hour drive south, um, the siege of Gaza, the forced famine is still taking place. That while I'm enjoying, my time in Beirut, um, that the south of the country is still being bombed. And it was bombed almost on a daily basis while I was there. On a couple of days, the MK drone was audible above Beirut. Um, I saw some of the wreckage, some of the ruins from the most recent war. And I don't know. There's a lot. And I think there's a lot all happening at the same time. There's a lot of contradictions that I noticed while I was there that's just like very malleable, and especially seeing how the city's changing. So I just want to share some stuff, some updates about my trip, um, in a kind of personal lens, but then also talk about some updates or some like future things that I'm working on. I got a bunch of books while I was there that I might do episodes on, like reviews of the books. Um, but yeah, for the most part, I'm gonna talk a lot about, politically depressed in a real manifest way. I've been talking a lot about it as myself, using myself as almost like a case study. I've been interviewing people on this channel and on this podcast that I think also share some experiences of like political depression, people that are very involved in these things and they're like are more aware than others about how these things affect their mental health. Um, but so yeah, going back home really brought to light the kind of like fuck, it's not just me. I never thought it was just me, but there's like a up close reminder of the fact that I made this project not out of there's a selfish aspect to it, like this is helpful for me, but I'm very aware that what I'm trying to do is give name to a thing that most of us are experiencing, you know, or at least give space to talk about that aspect of these political crises and injustices. Um, which is to talk about them a little bit with the mental health lens. And again, I realize that we still don't really have a good language. Mental health sounds so bizarre when we're talking about, a people like 4, 5, 6 million people who for 5 years have experienced and survived and struggled against numerous crises that are compounding, you know? Like aside from the war, um like the currency is still fucked. The economic situation in the country is still morbid. It's gotten to a bit of a stable position, but again, in that way where it's like crises kind of stabilize themselves and there's a new normal. But I think most people, you can't really, you know, um, like when I would go to exchange $100, I would get 9 million lira. And it's just this fat stack of the largest denomination of the currency we have, 100,000. And when I was a kid, not just when I was a kid, up until 5, 6 years ago, and what I'd grown up with, um, $100 would be 150,000, not 9 million. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to share some experiences, some bad, some good, and that'll be today's episode. I also realized that again, since I have this space, I'm gonna be more fine with it being just sort of updates of like, hi. Um, and for the more like in-depth stuff, I'm currently working on a video essay on the Druze, which I wanted to do more of while I was there, but I didn't end up doing so because I realize I always overestimate my capacities while I'm there, and I think I'll be able to do work. But smartly enough, I knew not to bring this like bulky microphone. And sure enough, I didn't even use the small ones I brought with me. But yeah, um, before I start with the episode proper, hello, welcome to another episode of the Politically Depressed podcast. I'm going to start calling it the podcast to differentiate it from the channel. If you like this podcast and you like the stuff that I share, there are two main ways you can support me in this journey of community building around, yeah, going mad in the end times. You can become a member of the From the Periphery Media Collective Patreon page, which will have the links below. This podcast is a part of the FTP Collective. And if you become a member, you not only help support this project, but all the other projects. You get access to a lot of other stuff. You kind of basically join a community of a bunch of different, I mean, not just projects, but the people around the projects. We do a monthly hangout where we talk to people. So it's like if you feel lonely in a lot of this despair, it's a pretty cool space. And it's a lot of cool people from around the globe, essentially, who listen to not only this podcast, but the other podcasts. And I don't know, we just sort of like hang out. Literally, it's a monthly hangout. So become a member of the Patreon. It's a monthly thing, as little as $5 a month. And otherwise, if you want to just support me personally, especially if you just want to do a one-time donation, which would be very grateful, I'd be very grateful. I have a tip jar, which is also in the links below. And it's just a way of saying thanks in a kind of monetary way that helps me keep doing this, you know? Even a small amount, you know, contributes and like builds up. So that's the announcement for today. So, I haven't been to Lebanon since September of last year. And since then, a lot has happened. I only just nearly missed, or I very closely missed, the start of the escalation of the aggression on Lebanon by the Israelis. I left on September the 15th, and September the 17th was the notorious terrorist pager attack that the Israelis committed. And then only a few days after that, it escalated. Massive bombing campaigns in the south. They began bombing Beirut, forcing up to 1 million people to be displaced. This escalation would go on for 2 months. More than 3,000 people martyred in Lebanon. And it's just, it it was horrible. It was horrible to witness. And I knew all along, obviously, that witnessing it from afar is a fraction of experiencing it. And, but still, I have loved ones that I was sort of just constantly fucking terrified about. And, I don't know, a lot of shit has happened since. And this isn't like an overview of what's happened in the last like 8 months in Lebanon, but it's just going back. It was first just really, really good to hug my mother. She was someone who obviously, for many reasons, I was very worried about, and for whom me being here, away and safe, it forms a kind of complicated relationship or a conflicting one. Like what's the point of me being here safe if there are people there that I love that are sort of alone in this, and that I'd rather be there with them, but obviously I don't want to be there because you know what I mean. Like it's that, but I don't know. There's a lot of stories of people who did go back during the war because they're like, "What the fuck am I doing sitting in Paris when my parents are like freaking out? Like, I want to be with my family." Anyway, sorry. So it was very good to see her. I spent a lot of time with her, which was obviously a big priority for me in this visit. Um, I saw a lot of friends. I had a lot of I realized I didn't do any events. I think there's one event, like sort of a day trip that I did with a couple of friends who were also visiting, who I hadn't seen physically in 5 years. And this was the only like big thing I did. I don't really care much for events or for parties or for stuff, and especially given the times, like everything feels morbid. Um, But yeah, I took them to see the Hall of Fame Wax Museum on. Are you okay, Charmaine? Sorry, I don't know if you heard that, but my cat sleeps in this shoebox, and he really likes the incline of it. I don't know if you can imagine an open shoebox, but sometimes what happens is he leans too much on this side, and it like. Sorry, if you're not watching the video, that doesn't make any sense, but it keeps happening, but he's fine. Anyway, the Hall of Fame Wax Museum, it was what I described like as a semi-ironic day trip or half day trip, and it's just a lot of fun. I'm gonna show some pictures here. This is a wax museum in just to the north of Beirut, and as you can see, these aren't very good. I'll show the one now, which I think is the best one they have, is Hafiz al-Assad, and they did it well. But there are others, such as this. I don't know which one I'll pick, where you look at it and you're like, "That is who is that?" And then you look at the name, like, "What?" Oh, I'll show the one of the King of Jordan, who to me I saw it, especially with the kind of stature. But it was wild. It was fun. It was a bit of an experience. I'd been there like 3 or 4 times before, and but it was nice showing other people it. And the whole thing just has a bit of a tone problem. I don't know. Anyway, aside from that, I just spent a lot of time hanging out with friends, eating very good food. I I live in a country which is not very well known for its cuisine, and as someone who comes from a place which is very well known for its cuisine, when I go back, I have like a list of restaurants, but also dishes that I'm like I have to have, and I had basically all of them. But again, with the caveat that it was very hard, like I was constantly checking, like there's that. I realized though, actually, sorry, what I was gonna say just to finish the point was that um, that it was hard to fully enjoy like the kind of abundance of food and the options and whatever when I know and I'm like constantly aware of that people are dying in Gaza from this forced famine by the siege. It's and it's not this easy thing of like just don't think about it because that feels kind of gross. And especially being in Lebanon, being in an Arabic speaking country, being in a Levantine, being, at home where we're speaking basically not just the same language, but dialect. Um, And also, as Lina Munzer pointed out, I think in an interview I did with her at the beginning of this project, that one thing that's kind of daunting and haunting about being in Lebanon at this time of this the genocide in Gaza is that we share the same sunset. I mean, I know all of us technically share the same sunset, but as in it happens at the same time. And so there's this sort of dissonance that I think a lot of us have when we watch things on the phone or on the news, that this could be a while ago, you know, without even really registering. And I think Instagram really plays into this a lot. That you see a video, and sometimes Instagram doesn't say, I don't know how this works, but it doesn't say when the date is. I have to go into the comments to see when was like the first comments or whatever. Um, it kind of separates it from time, and so it makes it a bit more distant. And so it's that feeling that this video could be from a week ago or 2 months ago, or if I extend the logic of that, could have never actually happened. You know, it's so like distanced from my own actual experience of reality. But being in Lebanon, it's like when the sun sets, the sun sets there. I don't know. It gives a kind of like fucking. Anyway. But it's not just what's happening in Gaza as well. One thing that's also been weighing very heavily on my heart is what's happening in Sweden. And it's still going on, but it's not as intense as it was a couple of weeks ago. But there is still like an active siege on Sweden in southern Syria. And so, for instance, when I went to my village, or when I would see like a Druze sheikh, you know what I mean? There is that more immediate connection. And it's also beyond that mountains, and beyond there, that's where it's happening. Like I said at the outset, you know, I was enjoying my time in Beirut. Um, all the while, the south of the country was being bombed on a daily basis. Assassinations, wanton kind of destruction of areas, incursions by the Israeli army, or like some bullshit with the UN. There was just generally a kind of a real tense feeling all the time, but also a feeling of despair. And here I think I can speak to why I decided to title this episode the way that I did. Almost everyone I know is on medication. I discovered only like a year ago, that what I'm taking is like the lightest thing. And the situations in Lebanon, because again, we just went through a war that has not ended. We also have a new government, which seems to be completely surrendering essentially to U.S. Israeli demands. Because like regardless of what you think of Hezbollah, like at the moment in the last few weeks I was there, or the last few days, there was really being this push and like becoming official, the disarmament fully of Hezbollah, not just from the south. But so in all of these talks and in all of these proposals by the US, there's no concessions. They're offering us nothing. It is a pure, like, you do this and we will just keep doing whatever we fucking want. Like, there's not even like, you know, Israelis saying that they'll stop bombing, or they'll pull out of the south, of the 5 locations they occupy. Nothing. It's just demands, and for one reason or the other, this new government seems kind of, I don't know, capitulating to them. And that's causing a lot of tension. But at the same time, there's like no fervor, or very little fervor, for anything resembling the war that just happened. And there's a kind of fatalism and a cynicism. And there are a lot of people still talking, but like I don't know, it's very fucking difficult. We're in a very, very shitty situation as Lebanon, but also as the region. And there's very little silver linings or things around the corner. And so what I see with a lot of people and the political discourse that I saw and heard and like it's just I mean, and I'll say this with full like awareness of why, but there's like very little critical thinking. Like, you know what I mean? I'm very aware. And while I was there again for the 2 weeks, I did not think much. I didn't work much. Things are so quick. And like just at a day-to-day life, there's a kind of like chaos that I fucking love. But then on top of that, the kind of like political and economic and military and all that, it just like it drives you mad, literally, and you're not really able to think. And so this isn't like a blaming, like, why aren't they like reading Fanon? But what I realize, and I noticed this from the outside, but coming into it, I think I was also aware of it, is that to me, the only places I'm seeing a sort of critical thinking is in the satire. Um, like, sort of like a generative political thinking that I don't always agree with, but that it's happening. And in many ways, other places, if there's like discussions or whatever, it's either kind of just talking about what's happening. If there's a sort of stance, it's usually aligned with a kind of a party stance, but it is very difficult. And I feel like people do not have the emotional or psychological wherewithal or capacity to hold. I don't even want to use the term nuances because I don't like that term anymore, but to hold all the aspects of the reality we're going through, to acknowledge the shit, the deep, 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 deep shit we're in. I think there's a lot of analyses that kind of like try to salvage us from the reality of the shitness we're in, you know? But to me, that's um, it's a terrifying fact that we can't face reality in that way. But it's also like I can't. Um, but again, one thing that I discovered while I'm there, but also in the past few months, is I'm like so much more understanding of my parents' generation and how they tend towards conspiracy thinking. Like, we as humans, we need to be able to make sense of things. I believe. I believe this is like a core facet of the human experience. We have an innate sense of finding patterns, and we strive, or like, we aim towards creating narratives to make sense of what is essentially many, many different conflicting and parallel moving factors and players, and it's a lot. Like, life is a lot, but then also the political, economic, security, military, colonial situation in the Levant, with imperialist powers, but also the local bourgeoisie powers, but also the regional powers. And so when I say that, to me, the only places I'm seeing generative thinking come from satire, I'm thinking of two main cases. And here I think it's also because like reality has become so absurd. Oh, I wanted to finish that point about conspiracy thinking. So yeah, because we have that desire, we sort of like have a tendency to create these narratives that like go on top of the situation to make sense of it. Um, but when I see a flaw in that, it like breaks the whole thing for me. Um, and so that's why I'm also going mad because I can't see a narrative and I'm stuck in this kind of like lack of narrative space where I'm trying to accept the kind of totality of it all and the chaos of it all and accept the chaos of it all. Um, but yeah, so wait, where was the point that I was going to before I uninterrupted myself? Ah, right. So when I say that I think satire uh, is to me some of the only places I'm seeing a kind of political thinking, like critically, I'm thinking of two main examples. One is the Lebanese meme pages. Again, I can read into their politics because I've been following these things for literally a decade now, like the formation of these pages. But they're the only places that are kind of not just like saying what's happening, but they're giving a bit of a spin to it that I find funny, but also that's like, I see some attempt at like making sense of it. I'll give a couple of examples here, maybe with translation. I think the one that I saw just a few days ago was like us if there is a giving up of the weapons, us if we don't give up the weapons, and it's like the same fucking disaster. Um, but yeah, so it's like that kind of shit. The other one is Al Hudud, and this is actually like a bigger page, a bigger like it's a printed magazine, and it's got an online thing. They published something a few weeks ago that I found fucking hilarious, and to me, not just services this kind of like political thinking, but I think reinforces my thesis here essentially. Because what they did is they published a post, which is this. It's a picture of Naim Qasim, the new head of Hezbollah, saying that we have the ability and are ready to destroy Israel. You know, and this is a satire page. What's really fucking funny about this is the day before, Naim Qasim actually said this. And this is a picture of like a real newspaper, like a factual, whatever, publishing this thing. And so just the very idea of a satire paper just reprinting what is really being said, to me, reinforces this point that, like, yeah. And I mean, in a bigger sense, or rather in an external sense, The Onion, I do honestly think this isn't like a hot take of mine. I do think The Onion magazine from the US, which is another satirical paper, um, has some of the best analysis coming out of the US. Like, of all the media organizations, who are just, you know, complicit in genocide at this point, but to a point of like lunacy, to a point of like foregoing any sense of like, I don't know, sense or rationality. It's just pure ideology. Pure ideology. Anyway, so I do get the sense, having just been back from Lebanon, that like, yeah, there's obviously so much like exhaustion, and like that makes total sense. Um, but it's also very like difficult because like, and they know it. You know, it's shit's not gonna go away. Israel's not just gonna go away. The economic collapse is not gonna go away. There are new reports of just like how entrenched some figures, especially one guy named Anton Sehnawi, who is like a big ass banker who also fund what's it called, fund rolls. What's the term? Like funds um this armed fascist group of Christian extremists who all they do is monitor their neighborhoods and beat up Syrians and queer folk. He, it was revealed, is like super fucking in bed with the Zionists. Um, to the point where there's a photo of him at an event wearing the kind of like yellow ribbon thing. And so it's like there's a deep shit in Lebanon that goes very, very deep. And at the moment, there are these contradictions that are like coming to a head, and it's terrifying. And so I see this really taking its toll on people and taking its toll on the discourse and people's capacity to not only talk but think. I got a sense of there's just a lot of resentment. And I've seen people write about this. Um, but there's not really an energy to like do anything proactive. I mean, to me, something that just like frustrates me is that there's not really a strong boycott movement within the country, which is something that could just easily be done. But when I was there, I kept seeing people sit at Starbucks. I'd yell at them because I generally have lost my ability to like not. Um, but McDonald's still fucking exists. People are still selling Nestle products. Like, not just people. Like, it is the vast minority who like of like establishments that are selling like, you know, non Pepsi or Coke soda, um even though they're available. But yeah, it was a lot. All in all, I really enjoyed my time. I'm glad I went. It was nourishing. It was necessary. I saw family. I saw my village. I saw my friends. I saw my city. There's one thing that I was saying when I was there, which is part of the reason that I feel the need to go back. I need to check in on it. Because I'm worried it'll become strange. You know, like you go back after a few years and you don't recognize it. And a part of that is just true regardless. Beirut is a very different place than it was when I was growing up there. The economic collapse has very much so changed the city. And in many ways, the ways that the regional and local elites have rebounded have changed the city. Like there's some places that I saw which were like clearly Gulf money buildings, these disgusting huge glass um, buildings, which for the first few years after I saw them come up, which coincided just before the start of the crisis, maybe there's like one or two one or two like flats with lights. Now there's quite a few, and to me, this is a kind of disgusting indication that, um, yeah, there's sort of like a rebounding of the bourgeoisie in Lebanon at the expense of the rest or disregarding the rest. That basically, yeah, if you have money, you can be fine. You can basically not even experience like power cuts or anything. But yeah, there's just a lot. A week before I left, I had lunch at this cafe that overlooked the port. I'll show a picture of it here. This was the view from the cafe, and it was very strange. Just sitting eating, and like you look to the left, and it's just like there is your trauma, like looking back at you. And I'd never spent that much time looking at it, but I was looking at like the crater. The people I was with were like are from the Ba'a, so they never really knew that much. Like they knew it happened, and I think whatever, but like they were asking me like, wait, where did the explosion come from? And I don't know. I think in wrapping up, I think that's an interesting thing that happened 5 years ago. Um, the pain of it is very much so still with me and with everybody. I was there for the first time actually since it happened on the anniversary of it. There is still zero accountability. Nobody has been held accountable or faced any sort of justice for their role, even though we know they knew. There was widespread knowledge amongst the important people of the existence of that and the danger of the nitrate in that warehouse. But that it's still standing. Or rather, again, I'll show the photo, the grain silos are still standing. Half destructed by the explosion, half because just after the explosion, the structural integrity, and I think now there's only like 4 silos left. But it remains as a constant reminder of the deep shit that we're in. Because I think part of the reason why there's been such an intense effort on part of basically the entire political class um, in Lebanon to really open up the file of the port explosion is because it shows how deep the rot goes. And it implicates basically everybody. And so, yeah, that's sort of my whole thing about my recent trip to Lebanon. I decided to not shave or anything for this, so you can see how I am after a trip. I'll probably get a haircut tomorrow or something. Oh, updates for it to come. So the next video essay will be on the Druze. I'm going to do, I think for the first time, like a video essay about the Druze that covers both politics and religion and history and geography and the like. I've noticed that that just doesn't fucking exist. Um, Especially coming from someone who is Druze himself. So that's the next one that's coming up. I'm gonna do another short episode of the podcast on like my last note on Christian Zionism, I think, because I think there's two things that it's very easy just to laugh at Christian Zionists for like believing it, but I think a lot of us actually believe it. I think the left as a whole has a millennial tendency. I think the ways that people talk about the revolution, when the revolution comes, after the revolution, it's very messianic, it's very millennial. Not millennial as in the generation, but as in there's a distinct phase in history that we will enter, which is called the revolution, which I think is problematic because I don't actually think that's how things work. Like I said, I got a bunch of books. One of them is the autobiography of Sahab Shara. The other one is the most recent book by Muhammad al-Kurd, Perfect Victims. I got a book on the translation of political writings by Hassan Kanafani. And so stay tuned for those. I might do like book reviews where it's actually like much shorter, maybe like just like a 10-minute thing, or maybe a super long one, where I talk about these books. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with this Lebanese illustrator, Rawand Isa. I neglected to release it on time, but I felt like after my trip I want to do this, and then I'll release that probably in a few days' time. So yeah, that's today's episode. Thank you so much for listening or watching. If you like this podcast, head on over to patreon.com/fromtheperiphery to support the network that this podcast is a part of. If you just want to give me a one-time donation, I have a tip jar below. The money goes straight into my pocket. And so, yeah, with that said, I'll see you all in the next one.